I'm Alice, 34 years old, and I never imagined I'd be standing at my doorstep at 2 in the morning, staring at my parents with their suitcases while my husband Tom blocked our door. They sold their childhood home last month and handed the entire $650,000 to my brother Jake for his latest business venture. Now they were demanding to move into our home permanently, expecting our master bedroom because family takes care of family. My twin daughters peeked from upstairs, confused and scared, as my mother's words cut through the cold night air, "You owe us this." Before I continue this story, please let me know where you're watching from today. If this family drama resonates with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories. Have you ever dealt with entitled family members who expected everything from you while giving nothing in return? Let's dive into how my parents' golden child obsession nearly destroyed my family. Growing up in the same house, Jake and I lived in completely different worlds. While I spent nights studying for straight A's and earning a full scholarship to nursing school, Jake was failing classes and getting bailed out of trouble. I worked 3 jobs to pay for textbooks and scrubs while my parents covered his third attempt at community college after he dropped out twice. Every achievement of mine was met with a dismissive nod, but Jake's participation trophy in Little League still sits in their living room shrine. When I graduated summa cum laude from nursing school, they almost missed the ceremony because Jake needed a ride to his friend's party. That pretty much sums up our childhood dynamics. The financial disparity was staggering. While I scrimped and saved for years to buy our modest 3-bedroom home, making every mortgage payment on time despite crushing student loans, Jake lived rent-free in our parents' finished basement until he was 32. He'd emerge occasionally to announce his latest brilliant business idea, each more ridiculous than the last. First, it was a restaurant with no cooking experience. My parents liquidated their emergency fund to finance it, and it closed within 6 months. Then came the revolutionary app that would change social media forever, which never made it past a poorly designed logo. The MLM schemes followed, each leaving my parents a few $1,000s poorer but somehow still convinced their son was a misunderstood genius. The announcement came during what should have been a normal Sunday dinner. I was helping Mom clear the dishes when Dad cleared his throat dramatically. Jake sat there with a smug smile as they announced they were selling the family home to invest in Jake's new cryptocurrency venture. $650,000, their entire nest egg plus the equity from 40 years of mortgage payments, would be handed over to Jake to make them all millionaires. I nearly dropped the casserole dish I was washing. When I tried to voice my concerns, showing them articles about cryptocurrency scams and Jake's abysmal track record, my mother's face hardened. "You've always been jealous of your brother's ambition, Alice. Maybe if you supported family instead of tearing them down, you'd understand investment opportunities." Tom watched from across the room as I was berated for trying to protect my parents from their own blindness. He'd seen this pattern for 12 years now, watched me cry after every family gathering where my accomplishments were ignored while Jake's failures were reframed as learning experiences. He knew about the calls I'd gotten from creditors looking for Jake, the times I'd paid his phone bill so my parents wouldn't know he'd spent their money on gambling, the way I'd covered for him to keep family peace. But this was different. This was their retirement, their security, their future being handed to someone who had never held a job for more than 6 months. The signs were all there if they'd chosen to see them. Jake's new Tesla appeared in their driveway a week after they gave him the first check, though he claimed it was a necessary business expense to meet with investors. His Instagram suddenly filled with photos from Dubai and Monaco, tagged as market research trips. When I asked him specific questions about blockchain technology or his business plan, he'd wave his hand dismissively and say I wouldn't understand such complex financial instruments. My parents ate it up, telling anyone who'd listen how their son was finally going to make it big. They'd retire as millionaires, travel the world, buy a bigger house. The American dream achieved through their brilliant boy. What they didn't see were the credit card bills Jake had racked up in their name over the years, always with promises to pay them back once his ship came in. They didn't know about his ex-girlfriend who'd called me crying because he'd emptied her savings account for a sure thing investment that turned out to be online poker. They refused to acknowledge that every single venture Jake had attempted followed the same pattern of grand promises, other people's money, and inevitable collapse followed by elaborate excuses. To them, he was still their golden child who just needed one more chance. And this time, they were betting everything on it. The midnight confrontation at my doorstep was just the beginning of the nightmare that would consume the next several months of our lives. My mother stood there with her practiced victim face, the one she'd perfected over years of manipulating family dynamics. "We housed you for 18 years, Alice. Fed you, clothed you, sent you to school. And this is how you repay us? By leaving us homeless while you live in comfort?" The irony of her words would have been laughable if it weren't so tragically delusional. They had chosen to sell their home, chosen to give everything to Jake, chosen to trust a con artist over common sense. Yet somehow, in their narrative, I was the villain for not immediately opening my doors to their entitlement. My father jumped in with his favorite threat, the one he'd used throughout my childhood whenever I didn't comply with their wishes. "Don't make us call the police and report you for elder abuse, Alice. What would your hospital think about a nurse who abandons her elderly parents?" The calculated cruelty of threatening my career, the profession I'd worked so hard to build despite their lack of support, revealed just how little they actually cared about me as their daughter. I was simply a resource to be exploited, a backup plan for when their golden child inevitably failed them. The situation escalated when Jake arrived in his new Tesla, the engine purring like an expensive cat. He stepped out wearing designer clothes and a watch that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. My parents' faces lit up at his arrival, expecting their successful son to mediate the situation. Instead, Jake barely glanced at their suitcases before shrugging. "Sorry, Mom and Dad, but I'm in the middle of some major deals right now. Can't have any distractions at my place. Besides, Alice has that whole big house. I'm sure she can make room." The casual dismissal of the people who had just handed him their entire life savings should have been their wake-up call. Instead, my mother made excuses about how stressed he must be managing such important investments. The commotion had drawn several neighbors out of their homes, and I could see curtains twitching up and down the street. My reputation in this community, built over 5 years of block parties, helping elderly neighbors with groceries, and organizing neighborhood watch meetings, was now being tested by my parents' theatrical performance. They raised their voices, ensuring everyone could hear about their heartless daughter who wouldn't help her own parents in their time of need. Mrs. Patterson from next door gave me a sympathetic look, having met my parents before and witnessed their blatant favoritism, but others seemed unsure what to make of the scene. Tom had quietly called his brother Michael, a family lawyer, while keeping his body firmly planted in our doorway. The twins had come downstairs despite our instructions to stay in their rooms, and I could see the confusion and fear in their 8-year-old eyes. "Mommy, why are Grandma and Grandpa so angry? Don't they have their own house?" Sarah's innocent question cut straight to the heart of the matter. I knelt down to their level, trying to shield them from the ugly reality that their grandparents cared more about control than family. When the police arrived, having been called by a concerned neighbor worried about the escalating shouting, my parents immediately switched tactics. Suddenly they were frail, confused elderly people being victimized by their cruel daughter. The officers, professional and clearly experienced with family disputes, calmly explained property rights and trespassing laws. No, they couldn't force their way into my home. No, being parents didn't grant them automatic access to their adult child's property. No, refusing to house them was not elder abuse when they had voluntarily made themselves homeless. The legal reality check should have ended the matter, but I knew my parents too well to think they'd give up that easily. As the officers escorted them off my property, my mother turned back with a look of pure venom. "This isn't over, Alice. Family takes care of family, and we'll make sure everyone knows what kind of daughter you really are." The threat was clear. If I wouldn't comply with their demands, they'd destroy my reputation, my relationships, and possibly my career. Jake had already driven away, presumably to return to whatever luxury apartment he was renting with their money, leaving his parents to figure out their own accommodation. The police recommended a nearby hotel and warned my parents that returning to my property uninvited would result in arrest. As their Uber pulled away, I held my daughters close, knowing this was just the opening salvo in what would become an all-out war. Dawn had barely broken when I heard the rumble of a large truck outside. Peering through the blinds, I watched in disbelief as a professional moving company began unloading furniture onto my lawn. My parents stood directing them, acting as if this was completely normal behavior. When I confronted them, still in my pajamas with Tom recording everything on his phone, my mother smiled sweetly. "We hired them yesterday when we knew we'd be moving in. Don't worry, dear, we're paying for it ourselves." The movers, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, stopped when I explained they were trespassing on private property. My parents had actually given them a fake story about surprising their daughter with furniture for her new home. The attempted break-in happened while I was at work, treating critical patients in the cardiac unit. Thank God for the security system Tom had insisted on installing last year. The footage showed my parents trying every window and door, even attempting to pry open the garage with a crowbar my father had brought. Our neighbor Mrs. Patterson called me immediately, and I had to leave my shift early, jeopardizing my standing with the charge nurse who was already dealing with short staffing. The security company confirmed attempted forced entry, and I filed another police report, building what my brother-in-law Michael called a necessary paper trail. By that afternoon, my phone was exploding with calls and texts from extended family. My parents had activated their flying monkey network, calling every relative with their sob story. According to them, I was a heartless monster who had thrown them out into the street after they'd helped Jake start a business. No mention of selling their house or giving him all their money. Aunt Helen called me selfish. Cousin Robert said I should be ashamed. My grandmother, who I'd always been close to, left a voicemail saying she was disappointed in how I'd turned out. Each message was another knife wound, carefully orchestrated by parents who knew exactly which buttons to push. Jake's social media campaign was even more vicious. He posted pictures of our parents sitting in their car, looking forlorn, with captions about family values and ungrateful siblings. His followers, mostly people who didn't know our history, commented with outrage about the cruel sister who abandoned her elderly parents. He conveniently left out the part about the $650,000 he'd received or the fact that he had multiple empty bedrooms in his luxury apartment. The narrative was simple and effective: successful businessman's son tries to help homeless parents while heartless nurse daughter refuses. The formal demand letter arrived by certified mail 3 days later. Their lawyer, who looked like he'd gotten his degree from a matchbook cover, had crafted a masterpiece of legal-sounding nonsense. They were claiming tenancy rights based on having mail sent to my address, which they'd apparently done without my knowledge. They demanded immediate access to the property and threatened to sue for emotional distress, elder abuse, and something called familiar obligation that I'm pretty sure the lawyer made up. Michael laughed when he read it but warned me to take the harassment seriously, as even frivolous lawsuits could be expensive and time-consuming to defend against. The anonymous complaint to my workplace was the cruelest blow yet. Someone had called the hospital administration claiming I was abusing elderly patients, using my parents' situation as evidence of a pattern of elder abuse. The investigation was humiliating. I had to sit in HR while they reviewed the allegations, my supervisor apologetically explaining that they had to follow protocol. My coworkers looked at me differently, wondering if there was truth to the rumors. Even after I was cleared, the whispers continued. My professional reputation, built over a decade of compassionate care, was being systematically destroyed by the people who were supposed to love me most. Tom's business wasn't spared either. He ran a small accounting firm with a stellar reputation, but suddenly negative reviews began appearing online. Claims of incompetence, fraud, and unprofessional behavior flooded every platform. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. When he traced the IP addresses, they led back to the public library where my parents had been spotted using the computers. They were methodical in their destruction, attacking not just me but anyone who supported me. The revelation about my credit came during a routine check for a car loan refinance. There were accounts I'd never opened, debts I'd never incurred, all traceable back to addresses where my parents had lived. The fraud went back years, small amounts that had gone unnoticed but accumulated to thousands in debt. They'd used my social security number, probably memorized from years of doing taxes, to finance their lifestyle and Jake's schemes. The betrayal was breathtaking in its scope. While I'd been working nights to pay off student loans, they'd been stealing my financial future. The driveway camping was perhaps their most effective tactic. They parked their RV, rented with what money I couldn't fathom, at the end of my driveway where it was technically still public property. They set up chairs and a small table, greeting every neighbor who passed with their version of events. Mrs. Chen heard about how I'd stolen their retirement funds. Mr. Williams learned that I'd turned their grandchildren against them. The teenage joggers were told I was mentally unstable and dangerous. They had all day to craft and spread their lies while I was at work trying to save lives and maintain my sanity. When the local news van showed up, I knew we'd reached a new low. The reporter, young and eager for a human interest story, had been completely taken in by my parents' performance. They sat in their camping chairs, my mother dabbing at dry eyes, talking about the American dream turned nightmare. How they'd invested in their son's business, believing in family and entrepreneurship, only to be left homeless while their daughter lived in luxury. The camera panned to my house, making it look enormous and extravagant rather than the modest 3-bedroom it actually was. Jake appeared via video call, spouting nonsense about cryptocurrency and family values, managing to imply I was jealous of his success without saying anything actionable. That night, as Tom and I sat with our daughters trying to explain why they couldn't play in their own front yard, why their grandparents were saying mean things about mommy and daddy, I realized this was no longer just about housing. This was psychological warfare, designed to break us down until we surrendered. The twins had started having nightmares, afraid their grandparents would take them away. Tom was considering closing his firm and starting over somewhere else. I was taking anxiety medication just to get through my shifts. And somewhere in his luxury apartment, Jake was probably counting my parents' money, completely insulated from the destruction he'd enabled. The golden child remained untarnished while the scapegoat bore the weight of their collective dysfunction. The betrayal by Emma hit harder than anything my parents had done, perhaps because I'd never seen it coming. We'd been friends since nursing school, supporting each other through brutal exams and exhausting clinical rotations. She knew every detail of my family dynamics, had held me while I cried after particularly cruel rejections from my parents. So when she called asking to meet for coffee, I thought I'd finally have someone to talk to who understood. Instead, she sat across from me, unable to meet my eyes, and confessed that Jake had been paying her for information. Every text I'd sent venting about my parents, every frustrated phone call, every moment of vulnerability had been reported back to him for $500 a week. The friend I'd trusted with my pain had sold it to the highest bidder. The loan discovery came through a random credit alert Tom had set up after we'd discovered the initial fraud. Suddenly, there were inquiries from payday lenders, applications for credit cards with massive limits, and most terrifyingly, someone had tried to take out a second mortgage on our house using forged documents. The paperwork was sophisticated, suggesting this wasn't Jake's usual amateur hour performance. My parents had either hired someone or had been planning this for far longer than I'd imagined. The violation of discovering they had copies of our deed, our tax returns, personal information that should have been secure, made me physically ill. Every piece of mail, every financial document now felt like a potential weapon they could use against us. Jake's business partner reaching out was unexpected. Marcus Kim was a legitimate businessman who'd been conned into investing $50,000 in Jake's cryptocurrency scheme. He'd done his due diligence but hadn't counted on Jake's ability to forge documents and create elaborate false portfolios. Now he was out his investment and had discovered Jake owed money to people who didn't accept bankruptcy as an excuse. "Your brother owes the Calabrese family over $200,000, he told me over a secure phone line. These aren't people who take payment plans. Your parents have no idea what they've funded." The fear in his voice was contagious. My family drama had suddenly ventured into dangerous territory. The school incident nearly broke me. I was in the middle of inserting N4 when the hospital intercom called for me to contact security immediately. My parents had shown up at the twins' school claiming a family emergency, insisting they needed to take the girls immediately. Thank God for the secretary Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd found their behavior suspicious and followed protocol. The school went into soft lockdown while they verified the situation. I broke every speed limit getting there, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. The image of what could have happened if they'd succeeded in taking my daughters haunted me for weeks afterward. Tom's business was hemorrhaging clients. The fake reviews had evolved into something more sinister, with actual clients receiving calls claiming Tom was under investigation for embezzlement. Former clients were being told their financial information had been compromised. New prospects were warned away by anonymous emails detailing fictional lawsuits and professional violations. We hired a cybersecurity expert who traced the attacks back to multiple IP addresses, all paid for with prepaid credit cards. The sophistication suggested Jake was either learning fast or had hired professionals with my parents' money. Our savings dwindled as we fought battles on every front. Aunt Martha's arrival added a surreal element to an already insane situation. I hadn't seen my mother's sister in 15 years, not since she'd been caught stealing from my grandmother's estate. She showed up with a notarized document claiming my grandparents had promised her my house in their will. The document was obviously fake, but she'd had it filed with the county clerk, creating another legal nightmare to untangle. My parents stood behind her, smirking as she demanded I vacate my own home. The fact that my grandparents had died when I was 12 and had never owned this property didn't seem to matter to their twisted logic. The grandmother's rights lawsuit was particularly cruel. My parents claimed the girls were being alienated from them and demanded court-ordered visitation. They submitted photos from happier times, before their favoritism became toxic, painting a picture of loving grandparents being denied access to their grandchildren. What they didn't mention was the school incident, the attempted break-in, or the campaign of harassment that had traumatized the twins. The girls had started therapy to deal with their anxiety, afraid every car that passed might contain their grandparents coming to take them away. Being hospitalized for stress-related chest pains was my body's way of forcing me to stop. The irony of a cardiac nurse being in the cardiac unit as a patient wasn't lost on my colleagues. My blood pressure was dangerously high, my cortisol levels through the roof. The doctor warned that continuing at this stress level could lead to a real heart attack or stroke. Tom sat by my bedside, looking haggard and defeated, while my parents used my hospitalization as evidence that I was too unstable to care for my children. They showed up at the hospital with flowers and photographers, playing concerned parents for social media while security kept them from my room. Jake's theft from our garage was caught perfectly on camera, but he was too smart to take anything valuable enough for felony charges. He took old photos, including ones from my wedding where he'd been best man, claiming they were family property he was saving for our parents. He also grabbed some of the girls' old toys, later posting pictures of them with captions about how I was denying my parents even these small memories of their grandchildren. The violation of him pawing through our personal belongings, selecting items for maximum emotional manipulation, made me upgrade our security system again. The pregnancy announcement from Brittany, Jake's newest girlfriend, came with a demand letter. She claimed Jake had promised her my house as a family home for their baby, complete with text messages where he'd assured her it was just a matter of time before his sister was forced to do the right thing. The fact that Jake was promising property he didn't own to a woman he'd known for 3 months showed how deep his delusion went. My parents immediately latched onto the pregnancy, calling themselves grandparents-to-be who needed to be near their new grandchild, conveniently forgetting they already had grandchildren they were terrorizing. The school bullying began slowly, with innocent questions from classmates about why their grandparents lived in a camper. It escalated when someone showed the news clip in class, and suddenly Sarah and Megan were the girls with the mean mother who hated old people. They came home in tears, begging to know why Grandma and Grandpa said those things about us. 8-year-olds shouldn't have to understand concepts like narcissistic abuse and financial exploitation, But I had to find age-appropriate ways to explain why people who should love them were instead hurting them. The night I collapsed at work was when I realized something had to change. I'd been running on adrenaline and anger for weeks, pushing through double shifts to pay for lawyers and security upgrades. My colleague found me in the supply closet, sobbing uncontrollably while clutching my phone, showing yet another threatening message from my parents' lawyer. The charge nurse sent me home and recommended I take family medical leave. As I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot, watching the sunrise and feeling completely broken, I wondered if this was what my parents wanted all along, to destroy me so completely that I'd have nothing left to fight with. The private investigator Tom hired was expensive, but Wayne Morrison was worth every penny. A former FBI financial crimes investigator, he unraveled Jake's web of lies with methodical precision. The cryptocurrency venture was a complete fiction. Jake had created elaborate fake websites, hired actors for video testimonials, and even printed professional-looking prospectuses. But there was no blockchain technology, no revolutionary algorithm, just a series of bank accounts funneling money to gambling sites, luxury car rentals, and high-end escort services. The loan sharks weren't just from Marcus's warning. Jake owed money to multiple criminal organizations across 3 states, using my parents' house sale as collateral for promises he could never keep. Harold Whitman's conscience finally got the better of him after 6 months of silence. My parents' former colleague and poker buddy called me on a Tuesday evening, his voice heavy with guilt. "Alice, I need to tell you something. Your parents knew Jake was lying." "We all did." He bragged about his con at our game nights, laughing about how he'd convinced them cryptocurrency was real. "Your parents said they didn't care as long as it got them into your house eventually. They figured you'd have to take them in once the money was gone." The revelation that this entire crisis was orchestrated, that my parents had willingly sacrificed their security for a chance to control me, was staggering. The secret bank account discovery came through the forensic accountant Michael hired for our defense. While claiming poverty and homelessness, my parents had maintained an account with over $300,000, money carefully hidden through decades of tax evasion and insurance fraud. They'd been collecting disability benefits while working under the table, billing Medicare for medical equipment they'd sold, and even had a life insurance policy on me they'd taken out without my knowledge. The level of deception went beyond family dysfunction into criminal enterprise. Lauren Martinez, Jake's ex-wife, reached out through Facebook with a warning and a flash drive full of evidence. She'd documented everything during their divorce but hadn't pursued charges because she just wanted to get away from him. The file showed a pattern going back 15 years of Jake targeting vulnerable people, especially family members, for financial cons. He'd stolen from cousins, aunts, even his college roommate's dying grandmother. Each time, my parents had covered for him, paid off victims, and threatened anyone who tried to go to the police. Lauren's evidence included recordings of my parents coaching Jake on how to manipulate me specifically, using my need for their approval as a weapon. The fraud discovery at the county clerk's office revealed an attempt to transfer my house deed that would have succeeded if not for a vigilant employee who noticed discrepancies in the signatures. My parents had hired someone to forge documents showing I'd agreed to sell them my house for $1 as repayment for raising me. The paperwork was filed at 4:59 on a Friday afternoon, hoping it would process before anyone could catch it. Only the clerk's attention to detail and her decision to call me for verification had prevented us from losing our home. Michael's research uncovered 12 other lawsuits my parents had filed over the years, always claiming elder abuse or financial exploitation when family members refused their demands. They'd sued my father's brother for his house, claiming he'd promised it to them. They'd tried to force my mother's cousin to add them to her business partnership. Each lawsuit had been dismissed, but the pattern was clear of serial litigation designed to exhaust victims into compliance. We weren't their first targets, just their most resistant. Martha's accidental revelation came during a recorded deposition where she forgot the camera was still running. While gathering her papers, she muttered to herself about the $50,000 my parents had promised her from my house sale, money she needed for her own gambling debts. Her lawyer's face went pale as she continued detailing the plan where she'd get a finder's fee for helping them steal my property. The recording became crucial evidence that this wasn't a family dispute but an organized conspiracy to commit fraud. The loan sharks made their presence known on a Thursday afternoon when two men in expensive suits showed up at my parents' RV. The conversation, witnessed by multiple neighbors and captured on the community security cameras, was brief but illuminating. Jake owed them $400,000 and had listed my parents as guarantors. The men were polite but firm about payment expectations. My parents' faces went from smug to terrified in seconds as they realized Jake hadn't just stolen their money but had put them in actual danger. Their golden child had thrown them to wolves while spending their retirement on cocaine and escorts. The complete collapse of their lawsuit came when Judge Harrison reviewed the evidence in preliminary hearings. Financial fraud, attempted kidnapping, harassment, cyber-stalking, and conspiracy charges were all on the table. Their lawyer, facing potential disbarment for filing frivolous suits, withdrew from the case. No other attorney would touch it after reviewing the evidence. My parents sat in the courtroom looking smaller and older than I'd ever seen them, finally facing consequences they couldn't manipulate away. Jake's arrest at Miami International Airport made the evening news. He'd been trying to flee to a non-extradition country with a fake passport and what remained of my parents' money. The FBI had been building a case for months, triggered by the banking irregularities Wayne had reported. Wire fraud, money laundering, and identity theft across state lines made it a federal case. The golden child who could do no wrong was facing 25 years in prison. Brittany's escape from Jake's web came with a treasure trove of evidence. She'd started recording their conversations when his stories stopped adding up, gathering proof of his lies about owning multiple properties, having millions in cryptocurrency, and being estranged from his poor sister who'd stolen from him. The recordings included him laughing about his parents' stupidity, calling them useful idiots who'd do anything for their precious son. Most damning was his detailed plan to have me committed to a psychiatric facility once they gained control of my house, using the stress they'd caused as evidence of my instability. The discovery that I wasn't their first family target came from cousin Diana, who'd been too ashamed to speak up earlier. She'd gone through something similar 5 years ago when her mother had died and left her a small inheritance. My parents had swooped in claiming the money was meant for Jake's education, despite him being 30 and never enrolled in any school. They'd harassed her for months, turned family against her, and even tried to have her fired from her job. She'd eventually paid them $10,000 just to make it stop. Her story prompted other relatives to come forward with their own tales of manipulation and financial abuse spanning decades. As the evidence mounted, the full picture emerged of parents who'd never seen their children as anything more than resources to exploit. Jake had been groomed to be their weapon, praised for his cons and protected from consequences until he believed he was untouchable. I had been designated the backup plan, the responsible one who'd provide for them when their schemes inevitably failed. The saddest revelation was that there had never been any real love, just a decades-long con game where Tom, the twins, and I were always intended to be the ultimate marks. Jake's arrest sent shockwaves through my parents' delusional worldview. They stood outside the federal courthouse wailing about injustice, claiming I had orchestrated everything to steal their successful son's fortune. The reporters who'd once sympathetically covered their plight now asked harder questions about the money trail and criminal charges. My mother, still trying to control the narrative, accused me of planting evidence and bribing federal agents. Even faced with irrefutable proof of Jake's crimes, she insisted her golden child was innocent and I was the real villain. The prosecutor later told me it was one of the most severe cases of parental enabling he'd ever seen. The final desperate attempt to steal my house came through a forged power of attorney document. My parents had somehow obtained a notary seal and created papers claiming I'd signed over control of all my assets to them due to mental incompetence. They filed it with 3 different banks on the same morning, hoping one would process it before we could stop them. The coordinated attack showed planning and malice that went beyond desperation into calculated criminality. Only our lawyers' preemptive alerts to financial institutions prevented them from succeeding. The court hearing for the restraining order was standing room only. Michael had compiled a devastating portfolio of evidence including security footage, recorded threats, financial documents, and witness testimonies. Tom spoke eloquently about watching his wife deteriorate under relentless harassment, about our daughter's nightmares and therapy sessions, about a family under siege. His voice broke when he described finding me collapsed at work, wondering if he'd lose his wife to the stress her parents had inflicted. The gallery was silent except for muffled sobs from some of the nurses who'd come to support me. My daughter's testimony to the court-appointed child advocate was heartbreaking. Sarah described being afraid to go to school because Grandma and Grandpa might take her away. Megan talked about not understanding why grandparents who were supposed to love them were being so mean to Mommy. Their innocent voices detailing the fear and confusion they'd lived with for months did what all the financial evidence couldn't match the human cost of my parents' campaign. The advocate's recommendation for no contact was unequivocal. The restraining order Judge Harrison granted was comprehensive. My parents were banned from coming within 500 feet of our home, our workplaces, the girls' school, and any location where we might be present. They were prohibited from contacting us through any means including third parties. Violation would result in immediate arrest and prosecution. As the judge read the order, my mother tried one last manipulation, clutching her chest and claiming heart problems. The bailiff, who'd seen this act before, calmly checked her pulse and confirmed she was fine, just angry. Jake's creditors descended on my parents like vultures on carrion. The criminal organizations he'd borrowed from didn't care about family drama or restraining orders. They wanted their money, and the people who'd enabled Jake were fair game in their eyes. My parents' RV was repossessed within days. Their secret bank accounts were frozen by federal investigators. The house they'd sold for Jake's scheme was gone forever, and now they faced bankruptcy at 70 years old. The golden child they'd sacrificed everything for was behind bars, unable to help even if he'd wanted to. The extended family's reaction to the truth was mixed. Some, like Cousin Diana and Aunt Helen, apologized profusely for believing my parents' lies. Others remained convinced I'd somehow orchestrated everything, unable to accept that the family matriarch and patriarch were con artists. The family fracture was complete and irreversible. Thanksgiving and Christmas would never include my parents again, and I found myself surprisingly at peace with that reality. Blood relation didn't obligate me to accept abuse. Jake's sentencing hearing revealed the full scope of his crimes. 23 victims over 15 years, $4.7 million in fraud, and connections to organized crime that would make his prison time particularly dangerous. He stood in his orange jumpsuit, no longer the golden child but a middle-aged con man facing consequences for the first time. My parents attended every hearing, weeping for their poor misunderstood boy while ignoring the parade of victims he'd destroyed. When he was sentenced to 18 years, my mother screamed that it should have been me in chains. The community support that emerged was overwhelming. Neighbors who'd initially believed my parents' sob story apologized and offered help. A GoFundMe organized by my nursing colleagues raised money for our legal fees. The girls' school implemented new security protocols and provided free counseling services. Tom's clients rallied around him, posting positive reviews to counter the fake ones. The truth, once fully revealed, had set us free from the isolation my parents had tried to create. The final confrontation came when my parents, now living in a weekly rental motel and working minimum wage jobs, sent a message through their court-appointed attorney. They demanded I pay Jake's legal fees and commissary money, claiming it was my fault he was in prison. The audacity of expecting me to financially support the man who'd tried to destroy my life while spending their retirement funds on cocaine and gambling was breathtaking. Michael crafted a response that was legally perfect and emotionally devastating. Not only would I never give them another cent, but I was prepared to pursue charges for the identity theft and fraud they'd committed against me. The last time I saw them was at the grocery store 6 months after the restraining order. They looked older, smaller, diminished by the consequences of their choices. My mother started to approach, but my father grabbed her arm, mindful of the legal ramifications. We stood frozen for a moment, 3 people who shared DNA but nothing else. Then I turned and walked away, feeling lighter with each step. They'd chosen Jake, chosen greed, chosen manipulation over love. Now they could live with those choices while I lived free. 6 months into therapy, I finally understood the full weight of what I'd carried for 34 years. Dr. Martinez specialized in family scapegoat dynamics, and our sessions revealed layers of manipulation I hadn't even recognized. Every achievement I'd earned despite my parents' neglect, every boundary I'd tried to set, every time I'd asked for equal treatment had been logged in their minds as betrayal. I wasn't their daughter. I was their safety net, expected to catch them when their golden child inevitably dropped them. The therapy was painful but necessary, like cleaning an infected wound that had been festering for decades. Tom and our daughters flourished once the toxic influence was removed. The twins' nightmares stopped after a few months, replaced by the normal dreams of 8-year-olds. Their therapist was amazed at their resilience, how quickly they bounced back once they felt safe. Tom's business recovered and actually grew stronger, his clients impressed by how he'd handled the crisis with grace and determination. We instituted family game nights, took weekend trips, and created new traditions that didn't carry the weight of my parents' judgment. Our home became what it was always meant to be, a sanctuary of love and support. My nursing career reached new heights when I was promoted to cardiac unit director. The hospital administration, having seen how I'd handled personal crisis while maintaining professional excellence, knew I could handle anything. I implemented new protocols for supporting staff dealing with family crises, understanding firsthand how personal trauma could affect work performance. The same colleagues who'd witnessed my breakdown now came to me for guidance, and I paid forward the support they'd given me during my darkest moments. The news of my parents' situation reached me through the family grapevine. They were living in a one-bedroom apartment in a rough part of town, working at a fast food restaurant to make ends meet. Their health was declining from the stress and poor living conditions, but they'd alienated everyone who might have helped. Jake's imprisonment had broken something in them, but even facing poverty, they maintained he was innocent and I was to blame. Their delusion had become their prison, one they'd never escape. Jake's letters from federal prison went straight to the shredder unopened. The return addresses changed as he was moved for his safety, other inmates having discovered he'd conned elderly people out of their retirement. Each letter was thicker than the last, suggesting lengthy manifestos about his innocence and demands for money. Tom bought a special shredder just for Jake's correspondence, and we made a ritual of destroying them together, symbolically rejecting his attempts to maintain control from behind bars. My mother's final attempt at contact came through a flying monkey I hadn't expected, my childhood pediatrician who'd retired but still exchanged Christmas cards with my parents. Dr. Coleman called, saying my mother was ill and wanted to reconcile before it was too late. The manipulation was subtle but familiar. Create urgency, invoke death, generate guilt. I thanked him for calling but explained that reconciliation required accountability they'd never provide. Some bridges, once burned, couldn't be rebuilt, especially when the arsonists refused to acknowledge they'd lit the match. The support group for family scapegoats became an unexpected source of strength. Meeting others who'd experienced similar dynamics helped me realize I wasn't alone or crazy. We shared stories of golden child siblings who'd consumed parental resources, of being blamed for family problems we didn't create, of the guilt that came with protecting ourselves. The group leader, herself a recovered scapegoat, taught us that healing meant accepting we couldn't change our families, only our responses to them. Teaching my daughters about boundaries became a crucial part of breaking generational patterns. In age-appropriate ways, I explained that love shouldn't hurt, that family members who truly cared wouldn't try to harm them, and that they never had to accept abuse just because someone was related to them. We role-played saying no, practiced identifying manipulation tactics, and celebrated their growing confidence. They would never wonder if they deserved respect or question their worth based on someone else's dysfunction. The unexpected allies who emerged included relatives I'd barely known, who reached out after hearing the truth. My father's cousin Sharon shared how my parents had tried similar tactics with her mother decades ago. Jake's high school girlfriend contacted me with apologies for not warning me about his nature sooner. Even Harold Whitman, who'd revealed my parents' knowledge of the con, became a strange sort of supporter, testifying in court about their calculated cruelty. These connections showed me that truth eventually surfaces, no matter how deeply buried. Our new family tradition centered on genuine love rather than obligation. Sunday dinners included friends who'd become chosen family, people who supported us during the crisis. Holidays were peaceful affairs filled with laughter instead of judgment. The twins had grandparent figures in Tom's parents and our elderly neighbors, the Pattersons, who'd shown more genuine care in 6 months than my biological parents had in a lifetime. We learned that family isn't about DNA but about who shows up with love and respect. Creating boundaries with other toxic people became easier after surviving my parents' assault. When Tom's manipulative cousin tried guilt-tripping us into a bad investment, we recognized the tactics immediately and shut it down. When the girls encountered mean girls at school using similar manipulation strategies, they knew how to respond. The painful education my parents had provided became armor against future predators. We'd learned to spot red flags early and respond decisively. The realization that finally brought peace was understanding I'd never had parents in the true sense. I'd had biological donors who'd seen me as an investment, a backup plan for their preferred child. Grieving the parents I'd never had was necessary to fully heal. But I'd built something better, a chosen family of people who loved me for who I was, not what I could provide. The twins would grow up knowing unconditional love, never questioning their worth or place in our family. On a quiet evening, as I watched Tom help the girls with homework while dinner simmered on the stove, the truth crystallized perfectly. This was what family meant. Not grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but daily choices to show up with love and respect. My parents had given me one gift through their cruelty, the determination to be everything for my children that they'd never been for me. Their legacy of manipulation would end with me. My daughters would know their worth wasn't conditional on their usefulness but inherent in their existence. They'd never doubt they were loved equally and completely. The final wisdom was both simple and profound. Family isn't about blood, it's about behavior. Those who truly love you want your happiness, not your submission. They celebrate your boundaries rather than testing them. They support your success instead of sabotaging it. Real family shows up with casseroles during crisis, not demands and lawyers. My parents had taught me exactly what family shouldn't be, and in doing so, freed me to create what it should be. The cycle of dysfunction stopped here. My daughters would never wonder why grandma loved their sibling more, because the grandparents in their life, biological or chosen, loved without conditions or favoritism. That was the greatest gift I could give them, the knowledge that they were worthy of healthy love and the tools to accept nothing less. Looking back at that 2 a.m. confrontation, I barely recognized the woman who'd stood in that doorway, still hoping for parental love that would never come. That Alice had been replaced by someone stronger. Someone who understood that no is a complete sentence and that protecting your peace isn't selfish. My parents had sold their house and their souls for a con artist's promises, then tried to invade my home to escape the consequences. They'd failed not because I was cruel, but because I'd finally learned to love myself more than I feared their rejection. That was the ultimate betrayal in their eyes and the ultimate freedom in mine. Thank you for joining me on this journey of survival and growth. If my story resonated with you, if you faced similar family dynamics or know someone who has, please share this video to let others know they're not alone. What boundaries have you had to set with toxic family members? How did you find the strength to maintain them despite guilt and manipulation? Drop your experiences in the comments below, and let's create a supportive community for those breaking free from family dysfunction. If this story helped you understand that DNA doesn't obligate you to accept abuse, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of triumph over toxicity. Ring the notification bell so you won't miss our next story about choosing yourself over family manipulation. Until then, remember that the only people upset by your boundaries are those who benefited from you having none. Stay strong, protect your peace, and never apologize for requiring respect from anyone, especially family.